morning, Americans. This is your favorite alien and Bubba here on Monday, October 14th. And wanted to do a few answers that I got from some people. Wow. I got 78 responses on my Constitution one. And a couple of people, including a lady, Ann Webb, and a Joanne uh, Saharsky, I guess you pronounce that way. Oh, and a Peter West. Um, those three had the best letters, especially Miss Saharsky there, where they were saying, "We saw your video on the Constitution, and you were saying that the teachers that taught you didn't want to teach it, and everybody was looking at the bell to ring to get out of there." And I understand what you're saying because I was confused. I didn't understand the thing that they were trying to say in that class. I didn't get anything good out of it. And this is, the other two guys, besides Miss Saharsky, said basically the same thing. Not in that kind of language, but, Mr. West was kind of that was an FU of a class. Well, Mr. West, I know what you mean on that one. Yeah, let me try to explain it. Um, when your founding fathers trying to do the Constitution, remember it's the late 18th century. They're doing this in 1788, and up until that time, technology hadn't progressed as fast as it has today. You had the same type of technology basically for the last 300 years. So from 1588, say the Armada invasion, to 1788, which is 200 years. Let's take that. That's about the time, it's about the time that we have here, 240 years if you go further than that. But let's go 1588 to 1788. Nothing had changed technological wise. They had little improvements here and there, but basically it was the same. You used muskets, yeah, they used muskets. You had wind sails, yeah, they had wind sails. You had lamps and oil, yeah, you had lamps and oil for light. So you didn't do anything hardly at dark. You didn't go very far. You had the Europeans, well, they had most of their Europeans' territory already mapped out, and they had no problems. They could go around the European territory with, except for, highwaymen and stuff like that. Vandals, well, you had that. But here in America, in 1788, you had just finished the 7 Years' War. The British have beaten the French, and they got the Northwest Territories. And, you had Indians all over the place. So you had very unsavory people, as they would say in their time. So you had to put in document accordingly. You only lived as far as your cities. You didn't venture much outside your cities unless you were people like Daniel Boone and his brother Squire Boone. People like them who went out to the wilderness and, investigated it. Well, there was a few people like that, but there weren't many. So they had to do the Constitution accordingly. And they made it big. Because remember, they didn't know what was coming down the pike. And their minds had no conception of what comes down in the future. They figure that since for 200 or so years it had never changed, that the future was going to be the same with their buggies and muskets and funny way of dressing, stuff like that. Well, when they died, 50 years later, or almost like that, after the birth of the United States, that's Jefferson and Adams, they knew they made a mistake. But it was too late. But this is why they made it ambiguous, so that the Constitution would work on precedent. And I mean precedents. You have to set, like George Washington, he set all the precedents for the presidency. The Congress set precedents for themselves, and they didn't know how to do it. So that's why you got a Congress today that's a pain in the ass, both Senate and uh, House, especially the House under Pelosi. Yeah, you got all those left-wing uh, socialists over there, like AOC, and then you got the backless Republicans on the Senate. So see what I mean? It's all bad. Well, and the Constitution, the next branch of the government, the judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, one man set the precedents. John Marshall, 1831 to 1801 to 1835. He is the Supreme Court justice that Mr. Roberts goes by, that most of the Supreme Court justices went by, except for one named Turney. Oh, he was a bad justice. Now, Samuel P. Chase, he brought back some sense and order to the Supreme Court during the Johnson impeachment in 1868. And this is why the document, your Constitution, is vague. It wasn't meant to be that in the first place. I don't have much time on the video to answer you all the vague questions you asked me, but I'll make this a part one, okay? Introduction to the Constitution with all three powers. Why it's so vague? It's because the founding fathers meant it that way. They had no idea what was coming in the future. And they thought that you, the descendants, would interpret the Constitution based on the future and through their eyes. But you haven't. You interpret the Constitution as you see fit, and that's not the way it was intended. That's why you got Chairman Nadler and Pelosi here and Congressman Schiff. They're looking at it through the political eyes. The Constitution is not a political document. It's a document for the people, by the people, and to serve the people. But they never understood that. And I can go further in depth on the Constitution if you want me to, because it's a document that you people should know. But many of you don't, because the schools don't teach it right. You don't want to learn. The teachers don't want to teach. And hell, you might as well just rip off the Constitution right now and bring in AOC and her and her socialism, and see how well you like it. I can tell you won't like it because I lived under socialism. I can assure you that you Americans living high on the hog would not like socialism. No way, Jose. That is fun. But anyway, I hope I answered your question here. Like I said, this is a cursory review because the Constitution is very complex and it takes time. So if you want the part two, write me back. Thanks.